The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred House Bill 681, an act increasing the marriage license fee, having considered the same, report the same with the recommendation that the bill ought to pass. Representative Susan W. Almy for the committee. The bill is on second reading, open to further amendment. The chair recognizes the member from Bedford, Representative Sanborn, for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move floor amendment 826H.
You are recognized. Your floor amendment is recognized, and you are recognized to speak to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many of us here who hate domestic violence and want to do everything we can to help the victims that need us the most. At the same time, many of us are concerned about the bill as it came out of committee because it raises a fee on the hardworking people of our state who wish to get married. The fiscal note on the bill said by raising the marriage license, we would raise an additional $45,545 per year. This amendment replaces the bill entirely, does not increase a fee, but does appropriate that same amount of money to help victims of domestic violence. This is something we can afford and should do. I ask for your support, and I ask for a roll call.
Chair recognizes the member from Hampton, Representative Cushing, to speak against the Sanborn floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. There were 50% of the homicides last year in the state of New Hampshire were as a result of domestic violence. 92% of the murder-suicides involved domestic violence. This is a bill, as recommended by the committee, that would help underwrite services for victims of domestic violence. Last year, this House and the Senate made domestic violence a crime, and I think we should all be very proud of that. But at the same time, last year, New Hampshire was the state that made the lowest contribution of general fund dollars to domestic violence services of any state in the nation. We have not increased the amount of money that we have put into the domestic violence fund through adjusting the marriage license fees since 1992. All this bill would do is to provide a little bit more of a floor so that we would be able to we'd be in a position to help support the 13 shelters in the state that provide victim services for victims of domestic violence. There are 1,131 reasons to vote for the bill as it came out of the committee, because last year there were 1,131 adults who sought assistance at domestic violence centers in this state but were turned away because there were not the resources. We have a responsibility to those who are vulnerable in our society to help them in times of need. We have a responsibility not to say to someone who seeks shelter that they can't come in because there's no room at the inn and you have to go back to your batterer. I would respectfully request the committee, this body, to defeat this amendment and to have the bill as it originally was passed by the committee ought to pass.
Does the member yield to a question?
Yes.
Representative Endelblue, you may inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does it make sense to penalize people who are entering into a marriage relationship with fees for domestic violence, in spite of the fact that it's very important to support this cause of domestic violence? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think in 1984, when the legislature first established the Domestic Violence Fund, it recognized that in some respects there is a nexus between marriages and domestic violence problems. And therefore, that was the decision of the state 30 years ago, of this legislature 30 years ago. I think perhaps there would be better ways to do it, but we don't do that here in New Hampshire. And as far as the $5, I would think that adding an additional $5 to the marriage license, if you think that's going to become an impediment to some people getting married, that's probably a good thing.
Would the member yield to a further question? Member yields. Representative Weber, you may inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for taking my question. Am I correct in thinking that the specific concern about this amendment is that although it makes an appropriation, there is no money behind the appropriation, and therefore we're going to have to take money away from something else? Is that correct?
Thank you for your question. Yes, that's exactly correct. I think it's responsible for us to say where we're going to get the funds when we make an appropriation for domestic violence. What the bill does is say where the money's coming from.
Thank you.
Does the member yield to a further question? Member yields. Representative Hall, you may inquire.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you for taking my question. Is there any data out there that supports whether those who are married have a higher or lower propensity for domestic violence? Is there any data out there supporting whether those who are married or those who are unmarried have a higher or lower, statistically, propensity for domestic violence?
There may be. I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Follow up?
You may inquire.
I don't have the data in front of me, but would you believe I'm aware that there is data out there that shows that those who are married have a lower, and by increasing the cost of marriage, we're going to want to encourage people to live together as opposed to being married?
Thank you for your question. I don't doubt that you've read something about this. I would simply say that in trying to assess whether or not someone who is married or not married has a greater proclivity toward domestic violence, I think an analogy to this would be we have to find the money someplace. And just as there are some people who have electric cars and don't pay the road toll when they drive on the highway, doesn't mean that we don't try and collect the money from those who use gasoline to help fund our roads. And I think supporting domestic violence services is as vital part of our infrastructure as our roads, highways, and bridges.
Thank you.
Does the member yield to a further question? Member yields. Representative Bickford, you may inquire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honorable Representative from Hampton. Mike, I'm trying to understand. This amendment says instead of jacking up a fee, we just take the money from the general fund, and we would be clear of jacking up fees. Is that right?
I think the member heard the question.
This amendment takes money from funds not otherwise appropriated. I'm not sure what those are, but the bill as it originally was introduced and passed by the Ways and Means Committee takes money or collects money from a fee and puts it in a dedicated fund.
Chair recognizes the member from Lebanon, Representative Almy, to speak against the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry to have to get up now. I was going to make a longer speech afterwards, and I have bronchitis, so I am not terribly good at remembering everything I was going to put in that. But on money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated. There is no money in the Treasury at this point not otherwise appropriated. What this actually does is to say to the Finance Committee, you have to spend $91,000 less in the budget this next time. They are already going to be spending several $100 million less in the budget next time. This just aggravates that. And it also makes it temporary so that every term and every time we need to cut, that is one of the things that we will cut. The governor will have to cut because they have no funding source for it. The marriage license is an appropriate fee for paying for this service. It has not been raised, and this is where I can't remember how many years, but it hasn't been raised for quite a few years. It is matched 2 to 4 times by federal taxes, which we in this state have all paid for, whether we are single or married, whether we are abusing or abused or not involved. We get back much less than our share of those particular federal taxes because we do not provide our match. The bill with the increase of $5 will restore them to, I believe, the pre-recession level of spending without inflation adds because of those 2 to 4 matches. The committee's decision was 20 to 1 for this funding mechanism. I ask you to support it and vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Will the member yield to questions? Member does not yield. Representative Sanborn has requested a roll call. Is that sufficiently seconded? It is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members will take their seats. House will come to order. The chair recognizes Representative Splain for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that domestic violence is a scourge upon not only this state but every state, and if I know that taxing married people is not the way to stop domestic violence, and in fact places an unfair fee when domestic violence transcends the bounds of marriage, would I then press the green button to adopt this amendment?
The question is on the adoption of the Sanborn floor amendment on House Bill 681. If you are in favor, you will press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. The chair recognizes Representative Lovejoy for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I know that increasing the marriage fee by $5 would allow the underfunded New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence to permanently be able to obtain much-needed matching funds to protect our most vulnerable citizens and not fund it with a temporary 2-year funding that has no funding source, would I now press the red button so that we can bring forward the original bill that was supported 20 to 1 on a bipartisan basis by the Ways and Means Committee? Thank you.
Question is on the Sanborn floor amendment on House Bill 681. This is a roll call vote. If you are in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations will be open for 30 seconds. Have all members voted who are present when the question was put? House will attend to the state of the vote. There having been 170 votes in the affirmative, 199 in the negative, the Sanborn floor amendment fails. Question is on the committee report. Are you ready for the question? What? That was the Sanborn floor. All right, it is sufficiently seconded. This will be a roll call vote. Members will take their seats. Hopefully everyone is in their seats. Yep. House will come to order. Chair recognizes Representative Splain for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I know that marriage is taxing enough, and I know that raising a fee on marriage licenses is indeed further taxing that, and I know that I was sent to Concord to fight taxes, would I now press the red button to defeat this bill?
Question is on the adoption of the committee report on House Bill 681. If you are in favor, you will press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Chair recognizes Representative Lovejoy for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You may have already heard this one. If I know that increasing the marriage fee by $5 will allow the underfunded New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence to obtain much-needed matching federal funds to protect some of our most vulnerable citizens, would I now press the green button and support the bipartisan 20-1 vote of the Ways and Means Committee? Thank you.
Question is on the adoption of the committee report on House Bill 681. This is a roll call vote. If you are in favor, you'll press the green button. If you're opposed, you'll press the red button. Voting stations will be open for 30 seconds. If all members voted who were present when the question was put, the House will attend to the state of the vote. There having been 223 votes in the affirmative, 146 in the negative, the committee report is adopted.